Yes.
I'm guessing more folks are gonna trickle in, but I'm gonna do a rare thing and start the seminar on time. Because I'm very eager to not only hear from Dr. Reames, but also get time for discussion after. So Dr. Tony Reames is the Tishman Professor of Environmental Justice and an Associate Professor at the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability, where he founded the Urban Energy Justice Lab and the Energy Equity Project. He's the Director of the Detroit Sustainability Clinic, providing sustainability and climate action technical assistance for local communities and governments. His research investigates the fair and equitable access to affordable, reliable, clean energy and explores the production and persistence of energy disparities across race, class, and place. He was a presidential appointee in the Biden and Harris administration from 2021 to 2023 at the US DOE, where he was Deputy Director for Energy Justice and established the Department of Energy's first ever Office of Energy Justice, Policy, and Analysis. There's more to his bio, but I think those are the biggest pieces. I'll just say personally, Tony has felt like academic family to me, even though I only just met him a month ago, actually, for the first time in person. So I'm just very excited to welcome him. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Secretariat, for the invitation. Alex for all the logistical support, getting me here to be with all of you today. Thank you for being here. I also consider you family. I just want to spend a little bit of time with you all today to kind of bridge the intersections between many of you are probably in public health, with our challenges with our climate crisis, and center that on the work that I've done over the last decade plus in energy justice and really trying to make sure we have a more equitable and just energy system. I love looking for pictures to go on the front of my slides, and so found this really cool picture last night as I was putting this together. I'm a Libra, so scales are a very big part of my identity. But really trying to balance our work on energy with our climate crisis, and the opportunities that we have to both mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis. Now, so where are we now? The global alarm going off, right? When it comes to the moment that we're at to either address the climate crisis or tip over, right? And so here's a message from Secretary General from the United Nations saying that we're on the highway to climate hell. We've seen increased disasters. We've seen the impact that it has disproportionately on communities who are experiencing climate change first and worst. And so we're at this point where we need an exit ramp off of this highway, and we have to do something. And so coming back home to the US, as Daniel mentioned, I spent 2.5 years in the Biden-Harris administration. And I want to talk a little bit about President Biden's climate action over the last 4 years to address this issue of climate change. And so this is a message from President Biden in 2022, where he began to talk about the urgency of this moment. But also in this urgency, there's major opportunity. And he was making this connection to public health, right? That I think sometimes is not well recognized, that it's not just about our reduction in carbon emissions, but that it also has impact for communities from a public health perspective. And so he talks about the health of our citizens and communities are literally at stake because of the climate crisis, calling climate change an emergency. And then the way that we fight this will protect people's health, and then this connection to our clean energy future, right? So looking at clean energy advancement as a way to protect the health of people and communities. And so the president set us on an ambitious goal to get to a net zero emissions economy by 2050. And so you see the pie chart there kind of shows our current energy makeup here in the US. Still about 60% of our energy generation comes from fossil fuels, about 18% in nuclear and 22% in renewables. And so our first goal is by 2030 to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. Then by 2035, we have an interim goal to reach 100% carbon-free electricity. And then by 2050, again, reaching net zero. How many people think we can do that? Oh, okay, come on. Oh, okay, we got a little lukewarm reception here. So where are we? This chart, I think, really demonstrates both the progress that we're making, but also the challenge that is ahead, right? And so let me walk through this chart really quick. So the blue line, or the blue space there, gets us to 2050, right? So we want to be here by 2050. Here's our interim 2030 goal. So the red area is where we would be without the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act. These two policies that were passed in this current administration to put us on the path toward climate goals. So if we had the status quo, this is where we would be. With the passage of the two large kind of climate investment bills, we're in this green space. This is where we want to be by 2030. So there's a lot of work to do, right? And a lot is at stake if policies are rolled back or we don't do anything else. So my work has focused really in the residential energy space. And one way we can begin to do more on our climate advancement is through residential decarbonization. How do we decarbonize our residential buildings across this country? And why is that important? About 21% of the total energy use in this country is attributed to our residential energy consumption. And about 15% of our greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to our residential space. And so we have a major opportunity to develop and implement strategies that help us decarbonize our homes, right? So the task is for us to understand our building stock and actually think about the impacts of the different strategies that we can take, whether it's energy efficiency or electrification, to both reduce energy use and our greenhouse gas emissions. And I love showing this image here because it allows us to really understand waste in our homes, right? We can see that if we don't retrofit our homes, we're losing 35% through poorly insulated walls, 15 to 10% from windows and doors being unsealed. We're losing energy through our floors and then through attics that aren't properly insulated. And so you can clearly see strategies to actually impact waste loss and begin to bring down our energy consumption in homes. But this is not an ideal situation, right? It's not easy to do. It's not affordable. People are already struggling with their energy costs. And so I like to say that we're living in the United States of energy insecurity. And that can be illustrated through the pictures you see here, but also just the headlines in the news. And so the first issue is affordability, which leads to shutoffs, leads to households being without energy because they can't afford it. And so you can see during the pandemic, some 20 million people were losing their energy because they couldn't afford it. Households were 3.6 million times more likely to be shut off because shutoffs were increasing during the pandemic. People are keeping their homes at unhealthy temperatures, too hot or too cold. You can see that family there during Storm Uri in Texas, when the Texas energy system failed so poorly. How could the largest energy producing state in our country fail so bad? You see storms that are being amplified by climate change. And then people are taking strategies that are unhealthy, right? Heating their homes by opening their ovens. People are freezing to death. In Michigan, in Detroit, on the west side of Detroit, a mom and her son were found frozen to death in their home because they couldn't afford their natural gas to heat their home. And so more Americans are having to choose between things like food and paying their energy bills. We call that heat or eat. Right? People are really making these daily trade-offs just to afford energy. And we have national stats on this, we have local stats on this, but in the Department of Energy, the Energy Information Administration, which is the Department of Energy's major data collection agency, has been measuring energy insecurity for some time, but the first time they did it nationally was in 2015. And so we got a bird's eye view of how much of an issue this was across the country. And so the three conditions of energy insecurity are the inability to pay your bills, foregoing basic necessities to pay your energy bills, or keeping your home at unhealthy temperatures because you either can't afford the energy or your heating and cooling system is broken and you can't afford to fix it. And so you can see the first time we looked at this, about 1 in 3 households were facing energy insecurity. So 14% couldn't pay their bills, 21% were trading off between heat or eat, and about 11% of households were keeping their homes too hot or too cold. Now 2020, what happened in 2020? Anybody got any thoughts on what happened here? You remember 2020? Anybody want to guess? COVID, right? And what happened during COVID? Why do we think the numbers dipped for each of these conditions?
Evictions. Stimulus check.
Okay, you got evictions, stimulus checks.
Stimulus check.
Stimulus checks. Anything else?
Didn't they make it so that you couldn't turn off people?
Yeah. So a combination of things, right? People moving out of their homes and moving into maybe multi-generational homes, additional resources through stimulus checks, and then moratoria on shut-off, right? And so we don't have enough information to really tease that out, but more studies are being done to look at that. But we saw this dip for a moment during the pandemic. And so this residential energy consumption survey, you see the acronym REX there, is done about every 4 to 5 years, right? And so the Census Bureau and the Energy Information Administration said we need to understand this a little more. And so they actually started a new survey called the Pulse Survey, which looks at a host of socioeconomic and other characteristics out of the pandemic. So it happens every week. But if you look at, just what happened in these 3 categories over the last few years, see major increases again, right? We stopped the stimulus checks. We stopped, evictions aren't happening as much, and the moratoria all went away. And so we see these issues of energy insecurity increasing. And there are also racial inequities in the experiences of energy insecurity. And so my former team at DOE looked at this across racial groups and found that 36% of African Americans were experiencing energy insecurity, 35% of Hispanic and Latino households, 34% of multiracial households, about 20% of both white, non-Hispanic and Asian households were experiencing energy insecurity. So we can begin to understand more about the conditions of energy insecurity, but also who is experiencing it at higher levels. So now one metric to dig a little deeper into the experience of energy insecurity so we can put a quantitative metric on it is what's known as energy burden. This is the proportion of your income that is spent on energy costs. An affordable energy burden, some people say 6%, some people say no more than 10%, but you can see how it varies across the country, right? And so you can see in the red, this is the energy burden for low-income households, people that make 150% of federal poverty, and then the median energy burden in that region. And what you find is that low-income households are about 3.5 times an energy burden higher than non-low-income households. So now we know that racial groups are experiencing energy insecurity differently. Regionally, people are more burdened than not and lower income households are experiencing higher energy burdens. So that gets us to this issue of the inability to pay bills. And we also see these racial disparities showing up again in energy burden. Again, learning more about the conditions and the characteristics of those who are stuck in this energy crisis. So as we continue to think about this as a public health issue, looking at the social determinants of health, we know that healthcare is one major issue to public health, but we also have these broader social, economic, and environmental factors. When they combine, they profoundly shape what happens to the public in a community. Research has shown that issues of energy insecurity are also associated with a host of public health issues like respiratory issues, mental health issues, cardiovascular conditions. And then when we take that quantitative metric of energy burden, we can recognize that it crosses social and economic factors as well as physical environmental factors, right? It ties to the physical structure that people are living in. And so some colleagues and I wanted to understand this relationship between energy burden and conditions of public health. So we got data on the county level energy burden across the country. So you can see the darker areas are counties that have higher energy burdens relative to lighter areas, which is very similar to that other map that I showed with regions. And so when we control for a host of socioeconomic and demographic characteristics, we find that as energy burden goes up 1%, we see 240 more premature deaths per 100,000 people in a county, 7% increase of the number of residents that say their health is fair or poor, and a 5-year decrease in the average county life expectancy. So there's some connection between the inability to afford energy and the public health condition of communities. But this is often a hidden issue, right? Can you ride by someone's home and know that they're suffering energy insecurity or they have a high energy burden? How many people think you can see that? You can, okay, yeah. Why do you think that?
You know, there's outward signs. You know, for example, windows are a prime example. You know, what are the conditions of the windows? How old are they?
Yeah.
You know, what type are they? And that's one of, in my mind, one of the first indicators.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I don't have it in this slide, but I often show, so I started this work in Kansas City, Missouri, which is one of the kind of hyper-segregated metropolitan areas in the country. And so there's a street called Troost Avenue that separates different school districts, different city council districts. It was a historical redlining separation. Same type houses on both sides, but you can see that difference. One side of the street where most of the low income African Americans live, plate glass windows, wood siding. On the other side of the street, newer double pane windows, aluminum siding. And so you can see that difference very, very stark, right? But often you can't tell. And so we need additional analysis to understand if people are suffering. So this image here, this thermal image of a townhouse shows one side leaking energy like crazy. Remember that picture I showed with the 20 and 10%? And then the other side, blue, not leaking any energy. I like to say this person found out about energy efficiency retrofit program and did not tell their neighbor about it, right? But it can be that close, right? And I think this illustrates just how we should take a community-based approach to our energy efficiency retrofits. And then when we think about this climate crisis and the benefit and burden of communities who are either experiencing climate change, contributing to our greenhouse gas emissions, we see this paradox. So here on the left, we're looking at per capita emissions, greenhouse gas emissions by racial group. On average, communities that have more white households have higher contributions to carbon emissions than African American, Latinx, and other racial groups. But when we look at energy use intensity, how much energy you're consuming by the size of your home. That's a proxy for energy efficiency. The higher the number, the less efficient your home is. And so now we see white households have lower energy use intensity, so their homes are more, on average, more efficient, compared to African Americans, who out of these four categories has the highest energy use intensity. So on average, African Americans are living in less efficient homes, but contributing less to our global greenhouse gas emissions. And so we have a challenge, right? We have this climate crisis. We're trying to address the public health of our communities through energy, but we have an inequitable system. And so the challenge here, and I'll talk a little bit about my time in government now, is how do we transform our energy system to address climate change, but ensure that the system we build is more equitable and just? And that brings us to this concept of energy justice. Many people are familiar with energy justice. Okay, good. All right, well, I don't have to teach this part here. But energy justice is really about this goal of achieving equity in both the social and economic participation in the energy system, while we remediate the social, economic, and health burdens of those who have been historically harmed by that same energy system, right? So thinking about communities that are hosting coal-fired power plants, but have super high energy burdens, right? High public health burdens because of asthma and other issues. How do we transform the system to ensure that they aren't more burdened by the energy system? And so then a just system would disseminate fairly both the benefits and costs of energy services, and also be representative and impartial in decision-making. And so thinking about procedural justice, who can participate in energy decision-making. And we have three key elements here that we're concerned about: the cost, the burden, the benefits, and the procedures. And so we look at these four principles of justice and apply those to energy. Distributional justice, what's the fair distribution of energy burden and cost and benefits? Procedural justice, things like access to information and decision-making, any legal rights. So we see people suing over things like shutoffs, people suing over different infrastructure being built in their community. Recognition justice, I walked through some of the people that are experiencing energy insecurity disproportionately. And then the overall goal is getting to this idea of some type of corrective, restorative justice, right? How do we fix this? How do we fix what's wrong? How many people believe that energy is a basic right? Right, we believe that, right? Normatively, it should be. How many people think energy is guaranteed in the US Constitution? No, right? So normatively, it is a basic right. The United Nations says that energy is a right. Our friend Diana Hernandez said if it is a right, then there are four rights that people should have: healthy and sustainable energy production, the best available energy infrastructure, energy that's affordable, and then energy that's uninterrupted. So this idea of not shutting people off, storms taking out massive energy infrastructure. So if we ever get to a point where we have energy as a right, these are some of the things we should think about. Internationally, the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 7 says that we want to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Energy justice started as an international concept between developed and developing nations around access to modern technology. Over the last few years and last few decades, it has really begun to look internally at countries and looking at disparities within countries. So this might be a little small, but I want to take you to the action at the federal level. So on the 7th day of his administration, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And it was this whole of government approach to the climate crisis, recognizing that despite the peril of climate change, there's promise in the solution. So super aspirational, right? When we think about our climate crisis. The opportunity to create jobs and build new infrastructure, deliver it in an equitable and a clean energy future, and put us on a path to this 2050 goal. And doing things like reducing climate pollution in every sector of the economy, increasing resilience, protecting public health, conserving land, delivering environmental justice, and creating well-paying jobs. And so success would be an all hands on deck approach to doing that. How many people think that was easy or is easy? No, it is not. But we had a lot of, and we have opportunities to do something. We have the framework, the guidelines to do something. And so within that executive order in section 223 was the Justice 40 initiative. How many people have heard of Justice 40? Okay. So Justice 40 is not a pot of money. Justice 40 is an initiative to change the way government thinks about the development and deployment of policies. And so the goal of Justice 40 is that 40% of the overall benefits of our federal investments in these areas, mostly addressing our climate crisis, will go to disadvantaged communities. And so at the Department of Energy, that was everything we did. Every program in our mind was a Justice 40 program. And trying to identify disadvantaged communities is also not an easy task, right? What characteristics can you include? One of the major characteristics that many of the environmental justice advocates wanted to include is race and ethnicity. That opens the federal government up for a lot of challenges. And so race and ethnicity, unfortunately, was not included in our identification of disadvantaged communities. But these are the categories we did include. So factors around climate change, energy, health, housing, pollution, transportation, water and wastewater, and workforce development. I'm primarily looking at like unemployment numbers. For health, the characteristics were asthma, diabetes, heart disease, and low life expectancy. And so what we ended up seeing is about 28% of the US population lives in a disadvantaged community or disadvantaged census tract. And that represents about 37% of all census tracts in the US. So at the Department of Energy, given this mandate to support the Justice 40 initiative, we looked across our programs and came up with 8 policy priorities. How are we gonna drive the Department of Energy toward energy justice? So this should be no surprise to everybody based on everything that showed you. Our first priority was to reduce energy burden in disadvantaged communities. And so that was for all of our colleagues to think about the programs they were creating. How would that program reduce energy burden? Because we have to be honest that some of these new technologies actually increase energy costs, right? And so what are the other factors that we can incorporate to bring down energy costs? We wanted to reduce environmental exposure and burdens, bring parity to clean energy access and adoption, bring down the cost of clean energy deployment, create jobs, job training programs, and then these last 2, really thinking about resiliency. How do we use this moment to make communities more resilient to climate change? And then energy democracy. You know, how do we get people engaged in the energy process? How do we allow new companies to participate in this? How do we get communities to have some agency when energy infrastructure is coming to their town? So we had the perfect office to do this. The Office of Minority Economic Impact was created in 1978. How many people knew there was an office that focused on energy and race in the federal government? I didn't know either until I ended up in the office, but the Department of Energy was created in 1977. 1 year later, Congress created this office. So at that time, we were in the midst of an energy crisis. Energy prices were going up because of war with the oil producing energy countries. And Congress said we need an office to focus on this and also do research on this issue of energy and race. And so there's a lot to read here. I'll share the slides. But there was a mandate to determine consumption patterns of minority communities relative to other populations, estimate energy burden, basically, understand energy burden for minority communities, and then create programs and policies to address what was identified. 1978. That work was never done. So that gave us an amazing mandate when we came in to create an office to actually focus on this. And so it was interesting that Congressman Bobby Rush in 2021 introduced the Energy Equity Act in the Energy and Commerce Committee in Congress. It never made it out of committee, but when we saw that, that gave us additional fodder to create this new office. And so my job was to build this new office out, hire folks with the mission of doing policy research and analysis, providing technical assistance on programs to advance equity for racial and ethnic minorities, other disadvantaged communities. And so I got to meet Congressman Rush at the end of 2022 as he was retiring. And I handed him my business card. He was like, "Oh, thank you." And I was like, "No, read it." It's like, "My Lord," incapacity. But it was really cool, kind of full circle moment to say, like, even though, the office you wanted to create never made it out of committee, we were still able to do that. And so we hired about 12.5 people, federal employees, to really keep this work going, hopefully into the future. So busy slide, but I just wanted to show you that we were super busy over that time that we launched in 2022 to really create a container for energy justice at the federal level. So you see something very similar in the European Union. They have an energy justice collaboratory, I think they call it, where the different EU nations are working together on energy justice, sharing information, sharing policy. So we wanted to do the same thing for states here in the US, writing papers about how you put equity into our decarbonization efforts, creating a model for communities to be able to optimize energy burden and determine what type of technologies they could deploy. We had a conference where we brought a lot of energy justice folks together. And that team is doing amazing work. They just put out their national energy poverty strategy, so to reduce energy poverty across the country. And so now I want to shift into some of the federal programs that are addressing this issue before I wrap up. So there are two long-running energy assistance programs, right? So this energy burden, energy insecurity issue is not new, but we haven't solved it. And we put billions of dollars into it, right? So there's, again, a huge opportunity to do something different. So the two programs are the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, and WAP, the Weatherization Assistance Program, or WAPS. So I want you to see how we've invested in those programs over the last almost 50 years. So WAP was started in 1976, and LIHEAP was started in 81. Huge infusions a couple times in the Stimulus Act under President Obama, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law under President Biden. So that's those spikes. LIHEAP is a bill assistance program, right? So that money goes to states through block grants, and they help folks pay their utility bills, which primarily that money goes to the utility company. Weatherization is actually a retrofit program to address those percentages I showed you of how much energy we're losing through our inefficient buildings. So why do you think the orange, which is the bill assistance program, has been funded at almost $140 billion, and the blue, which is our retrofit program, has only been funded at $24 billion? Why is there a 6 times investment in the bill assistance program than the retrofit program?
Popularity and spend.
Okay. bipolar
With,
disability.
in other words, the, LIHEAP is very visible. People talk about it, they know about it, they are part of it. But it's not as well known. And again, you don't get the big bang back. I'm talking like political.
Okay.
The bang, you don't get the same bang.
All right, so you don't get the same bang.
For LIHEAP, I imagine like more money is going to energy companies and providers, but with WAP, it's actually reducing the amount of energy use. So, yeah, use less.
Politics,
All right.
same thing.
Same bang.
Lobbyists.
Okay. Anybody else? So, great. All of these are totally aligned. There's a huge lobby behind LIHEAP. There's LIHEAP Action Day on Congress, on the Hill. The utility companies, when the utility companies are watching, utility companies really like this program, right? I like the program. I think it actually needs to exist, but could be reformed. The weatherization program is our long-term solution, right? It creates jobs, it reduces energy burden, it hits our climate goals, but it doesn't have the same lobby and support and awareness that LIHEAP does. Again, both of these are block grant programs that go to states. This map also highlights one of the challenges. LIHEAP is run by the Health and Human Services Department. Weatherization is run by the Department of Energy. So at the federal level, they're separate. Then when they go to the state level, in green are the different offices, states with different offices for those two programs. So you continue that disaggregation or disconnect between the two programs. In some states, they're in the same office and you do see some coordination. So you can contribute, a state can contribute up to 15% of their LIHEAP dollars into the weatherization program, and a lot of states do that. But I think there's an opportunity for greater coordination for this to be, LIHEAP to be a temporary solution until a home is weatherized, right? But there is some innovation in weatherization that I'm super excited about that launched in 2022 or 2021. LIHEAP is usually around $250 million. That's kind of the statutory contribution that Congress is supposed to give to it. If they go over that 250 million, the Department of Energy can create an innovation program that states can apply to competitively. So far, that program has contributed about $38 million to 21 projects that are really trying to find innovation in how we deploy weatherization. I like it because they have a place-based aspect to it, right? So again, I really think this energy retrofit opportunity we have is to do it in community and do it from a community approach. And so one project that I think is going to be interesting to follow is this project in Ohio called the American Addition Plus project. This created the first net zero energy neighborhood in Ohio and the first predominantly Black net zero neighborhood in the country. And so it's a recognition of the racial energy disparities or inequities that I showed you, to really try to focus on a community to understand the challenges to retrofits, but then solve those through flexible dollars. We also have home energy rebates. This was created in the Inflation Reduction Act with $8.8 billion, the largest investment we've ever made in retrofitting our homes. So Connecticut, you all have your application submitted. So they should probably be opening up this fall. There's a focus on low and moderate income households because they're the least likely to participate in programs. Massive deployment of heat pumps to decarbonize homes. And then it's thinking that we'll actually save households $1 billion a year and create some 50,000 jobs. And then lastly, this was another kind of pet project. The department was launching these earth shots, right? There are some areas of our energy system that are the hardest to solve, kind of like a moonshot. And so we said we need to harness all the technology and knowledge in the department to solve this energy burden crisis. So we launched as the last Earthshot, affordable home shot. Because we recognize that 75% of the homes that are here today will still exist in 2050. All right, so how do we make those homes more efficient? How do we find the solutions to make them, to decarbonize them? And the goal is to solve this in a decade. So all the Earthshots have a goal that you have to solve in 10 years. It targets the barriers to making energy efficiency prevalent in affordable homes. And it aims to reduce the upfront cost to upgrade a home by 50%. So you can learn more about the Affordable Home Shot. This is the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm. She loved visiting homes of folks that were weatherized, and people would bring their bills and show her their bills and how much their bill went down. And so this was super impactful for us to push this idea of a home affordable first shot. And so I hope what you take away from this talk is that a very simple interconnection that exists that puts energy efficiency and this idea of energy justice in the center of addressing our climate crisis that can have massive impacts on public health. And there's a major opportunity to study this, right? To understand as we're addressing climate change, both from trying to reduce our carbon emissions to actually allowing communities to adapt to increased weather events, increased heat, increased cold weather, and all the health issues associated with that. There are a lot of questions that still need to be answered. There's data that's out there that has not been evaluated. And so I hope, more people get into this research area. And I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
Seen a few commercials lately by realty companies that are advertising not employ, but a plan where if a house is if a house could stand some renovation, they will forward the monies before it goes on the market to the owners. And then there's and then that would raise the selling price. But is there any way to tie that into energy standardization and efficiency and energy improvement?
Yeah, that is a really great question and has been an idea that's been around for years. So there are a couple approaches to this. There are green mortgages where you can bake in the cost of the retrofit if it's gonna reduce the energy consumption of the home. So you might pay a little more, but the savings over time are supposed to mitigate that. What we see in some cities here in the US or primarily in other countries in Europe is a home energy score. And you can see a direct connection to the price of that home or the price of that apartment relative to an ABCD on how much energy that home consumes on your energy bill. I think some people are thinking about all the resources that are coming from the federal government and thinking about ways to coordinate those dollars so you can do that retrofit up front. There's still just a lot of ways that people are trying to do this, but we don't have a standard procedure for that. But it's great to hear those commercials I had. Thank you.
I wanted to ask kind of about the election because I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump's views on climate change are very different from the Biden-Harris administration from Harris. And I guess my question is how you foresee kind of the end, this field of this project, kind of changing if Donald Trump goes back into office, and if which aspects of these projects like this are somewhat more impervious to presidential shifts.
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, right? And I think all of my colleagues that are still at the Department of Energy and throughout the federal government are thinking through kind of the staying power of this type of work, right? One response is it's super vulnerable, right? I think that is what's at stake here, particularly things on equity and justice, right? So there is an anti-DEI movement that could really derail this type of work. Some of the benefits of what happened from the Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act is that programs are designed and money is out and being spent. So what you'll see, kind of similar to say the Affordable Care Act, is that it takes a while for programs to, either build out the infrastructure or catch on. And so you'll see things happening over the next few years. And people will be like, oh, that was funded by the infrastructure. That was funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. My energy costs have actually gone down now because I was able to retrofit my home. And so there's some hope if Donald Trump is elected that type of stuff will happen and it'll be harder to pull back funds or end those programs. The other side of that is if money isn't spent and we have a Republican Congress, they could pull dollars back. And so it is up to, folks who are in this policy space or in this space around activism or being activists in this space to really think about how we talk about these programs and how we get knowledge out about these programs. So, which is one of the reasons I like talking about what we did because people don't know. A lot of this stuff were brand new programs that took a year plus to either hire up and design programs. And so, I'm both optimistic and super concerned at the same time.
I'm just wondering, first, thank you so much for being here and speaking, but I'm just wondering if you could address how natural disasters are actually factored into some of the policies and programs going, specifically because majority of them are coming like unexpected while people are focusing on other areas like energy, just is still important. But I'm also wondering if you could speak a little bit about rural communities and resources outreach as well.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's no surprise that we are super reactive to the increased weather events. A lot of these programs are designed based on existing data and models that we have. So it'll take time to adjust the models to really meet the moment, I think. Because even when you talk about $8.8 billion in home rebates, it still only touches about 10 to 15% of households that need to be retrofitted, right? So we're a long ways off before we address 75% of homes that are here, that'll be here in 2050. And so we need a combination of federal dollars, private dollars, philanthropic dollars to really address these issues. Outside of the federal government, the private sector is a little more nimble. And so some of these dollars are actually to kind of energize the private sector, to make investments and innovate, right? So that's another part of what the big laws do. When it comes to rural communities, that was a major focus of the administration as well. And so some of the energy funding is in U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has a large rural energy action program. In Department of Energy, we had something called Energy Communities, which still exists. It focuses primarily on communities that are transitioning because of the changes in energy transition, whether it's loss of coal jobs or they used to have a mine and they no longer have a mine. And so millions of dollars to rural communities in the infrastructure law to convert those former energy sites into new energy sites. And so there was a whole program called Mines to Clean Energy that allows solar or wind to go on former mines. And so there's a rural desk at the Department of Energy that takes intake information from rural communities to understand what they need. So so big focus on rural.
We'll take one question from online and then we'll have to wrap up.
So many great questions here, but one of them is how can we get the energy and healthcare sector to invest in improving housing quality through investing in evidence-based public health interventions? So asthma, home visits, fall prevention, child injury prevention, etc.
Yeah, great question. So if I had a magic wand, I could see prescriptions for home assessments and retrofits, right? New York has done some great work looking at clean fuel replacement of boilers and other heating systems. and trying to use Medicaid, Medicare dollars to do those retrofits. I have some colleagues at Michigan School of Public Health that are looking at Medicaid data, energy burden data to really understand if dollars can be shifted from healthcare needed to address issues and moving that to preventative care, which would be in the form of home retrofits and improving the indoor environment of homes. A lot of I like pilots, but I think one of the challenges we have is how do we ever bring all that information together so we can actually be more strategic and create a strategy for this. And so even with the different programs that I showed that the government is doing, they're all very siloed. So we have no comprehensive approach to addressing these issues, right? Utility programs do health and safety on energy efficiency. Local community action agencies do programs on health and safety and energy efficiency. The federal government funds it, and so there's no way to bring all these resources together to do it at a community scale to really have larger impact. And so until we get there, just have a lot of individual approaches to it that will be really great, but no full plan for it.
Thank you very much.